about him except for his name and where he's from. But with that being said, Chris, you have the floor.
Thank you, Anthony. My name's Chris. I am an alcoholic. And yes, go ahead and blame Dan if you do not like what you hear tonight. That is fine by me. My sober date is June 25th, 2006. My home group is the Hackensack, New Jersey Young, we changed the name. It's the Bergen County Young People meeting in Hackensack, New Jersey, Tuesday nights at 8:30 p.m. That's my home group. That's been my home group since day one. I'm a member of the New Jersey Young People, the New Jersey Young People of Alcoholics Anonymous. And while we don't have an official convention yet, we are working towards our goal to do so. And so to get a little to learn about me and my story and how I got involved with the young people. Like I said, my sober date's June 25th, 2006. I got sober at 22 years old. I tried to get sober at 21 years old, but at 21 years old, I thought I knew better than anybody else. But my story starts off as a child. I'm the youngest of three. I'm the baby. Mother and father thought it was a normal family growing up. Everything changed for me when I was 9 years old in third grade, sitting in school one day, and a police officer comes to the door of the classroom, starts talking with the teacher, and after a little while, the teacher calls my name and asks me if I would come to the door, which I did, and she asked me if I would follow the police officer and go with him, which I did, and I thought I was getting in trouble. We get outside, we get in, he opens up his car, he puts me in the car, and there's my brother and sister. After about 10-minute drive, we get to my aunt's house. The officer lets us out, brings us to the door, opens it up. We go inside, and my entire family and close friends and relatives, anybody who knew me and my family were in that living room, and they all just stopped and looked at us. And we went into they brought us into three separate rooms, and one by one, my aunt, whom is my mother's sister, told us that my father had shot and killed my mother. My life changed from that point on. I was a very rambunctious child. I was ADHD before they even had a diagnosis for ADHD. I was all over the place. But the day that my mother died, a switch just turned off in my brain, and I totally shut down. I went from a kid where my parents literally used to harness me to the tree in the backyard, so I couldn't run out the gate and down the street and across town and have all everybody looking for me to I didn't leave my room that I was given when my aunt and uncle took me, my brother and sister in. The only time I would leave that room was to get something to eat or go to the bathroom, and I would go right back in. I stopped going to school. I stopped playing extracurricular activities. And from a really young age, I isolated. And now I didn't know what an isolating was because I was 9 years old, and I came from the type of family that if you don't talk about anything, everything kind of fixes itself. My family didn't believe in therapy or anything like that. No matter who told them, you should get him to therapy, you should get him to therapy. It was like, he'll be fine, he'll be fine, he'll be fine. My first sip of alcohol, I was 11 years old. It was Christmas time. And while my entire family was upstairs because my aunt hosted Christmas every year, and while everybody was upstairs laughing and having a good time, I was in the downstairs of the house, isolating away from the rest of the family, depressed and sad because I hated the holidays because the only thing I wanted was my mother, and I couldn't have that. And this particular Christmas, my alcoholism took hold. We had a full service bar in that basement, and nobody in my family are alcoholics. It was more for a show type of bar. The only time anything was ever drank from anything was holidays. And this particular Christmas, I'm watching people come down, make drinks, and go back upstairs and have the best Christmas ever, and that's what I wanted. So my brain started spinning, and I thought to myself, well, whatever they're drinking, maybe that's what I need. So I took a bottle of alcohol, took a cup of soda, mixed a drink, and before you know it, a weight was lifted off my shoulders. For the first time in 2 years, I didn't feel as depressed. I was able to go upstairs the rest of that Christmas and be around my family and socialize. And I had found my solution: alcohol. Alcohol allowed me to get outside of myself, and it allowed me to do things I haven't done in 2 years. And, I would drink whenever I could grab something on the weekends. I was young, so there was no progression really at that point. But here and there, I would make a drink whenever I could, and just to get outside of myself. Um, as time moved forward, 13 years old is really when my progression picked up. Um, I was shooting a basketball in a park by myself, and I saw some kids in a gazebo laughing, having fun. And once again, my brain started, spinning, and I started questioning why they were laughing and having fun. So the curiosity, I walked over, I asked what was so funny, and they were all smoking weed. So I asked if I could try it, and they handed it over. And once again, I found a solution. For the first time in years, I was able to laugh. I was able to joke around with other kids, and I started to feel a part of in that group. So alcohol and other substances were my escape. They were my solution right from an early age to get outside of myself, because I didn't know how to get outside of myself, right? Because I suffer from my mental illness, right? And when you take the alcohol out of me, I'm stuck with what's left in my head. And from a very young age, I was never taught how to cope. I was never taught how to talk about my feelings or my emotions. So I bottled it all up inside. And when I took a sip of alcohol, it allowed me to be free of those feelings and those emotions, right? I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel rage. I didn't feel hatred that I had towards my father. I didn't feel sadness, and I didn't feel depressed, because that alcohol allowed me to get outside of myself, and it made me feel good. But as the progression picked up, as I got older, and a snowball effect, that phenomena of craving, I always wanted more. There was never enough. I could be sitting in school, and all I could think about was getting outside of myself. So I start doing it in school. I get out of school. I can't wait to get out of school because I want to get out. I want to get out of myself. You know, I get to the age where I need to, the progression starts picking so much, right? I need to work. I need to be able to fund my alcoholism, but I didn't want to work. So weekend jobs, a week quit, and then my alcoholism really started to kick in, right? That that crazy alcoholic thinking told me, well, your father killed your mother, therefore he is your family, therefore your family hurt you, so therefore you need to hurt your family. That's the way my alcoholic thinking was. So I started to rob and steal from my family. Anything I could do to make some money so I can get the next drink. And that's exactly what I did. Eventually, it got to the point where, you know, I get arrested, and and my aunt's like, you know, he's been through so much as a kid, you know, and I just hear the enabling, and I knew right there, well, if there's not going to be any consequences for my actions from my family, I can just keep doing what I'm doing. So I just kept doing what I'm doing. And I just kept robbing and I kept stealing and I kept living a life of chasing that next drink because I needed that next drink. Because if I didn't have that next drink, I didn't want to be on this planet because the pain was so great. But eventually the enabling comes to an end. You know, the pain that I caused, the anguish that I caused towards other people, you know, can only mount up so much before, you know, even the family that enabled me so much, you know, had to put their foot down. And when you have a 5-year-old cousin, now that your aunt and uncle who love you so much take you in and have a family of their own, and you have a 5-year-old cousin who's crying in your face asking you why you stole all his video games and all his electronics, and you have no answer for him but to turn around and walk away while he's crying his eyes out, you know, that's a really shitty thing. But I didn't care because as long as I was able to get my next drink, that's all I cared about. Eventually, my family had enough. They told me to get out of my house and don't ever come back. You're no longer welcome here. You're no longer a part of this family. And they meant it this time. And I bounced around from person's house to person's house, burning bridge after bridge after bridge until eventually I was homeless and I was living under a bridge or in a dugout, wherever I had some kind of wall from the elements in the wintertime. And, you know, I'm a tall, skinny guy. And when all the money you're making is going to your next drink, you know, you don't eat, you don't drink properly, you're not nourished. And I became very fatigued and it made it hard to panhandle. You know, it made it hard to scrounge up $1 or $2 just to get a couple tall boys at the liquor store when it opened up in the morning. And there'd be nights where I'd be laying in a dugout in the middle of the winter with the same clothes on my back that I've been wearing for months, you know, and I'd have all those thoughts now that I'm sober because I can't get out of myself, and all that shame and all that guilt for all the stuff I put my family through, all the trauma, all the hurt, all the unresolved issues that I went through as a child that I never was able to get past started to pour into that head. And that was right there when I decided, you know, to take my life. So I walked to a bridge and I decided I was going to jump off the bridge because if my family wanted nothing to do with me and I had no friends, you know, what's the point of living? So I climb over that bridge, over the guardrail, and over the and I'm just about to let go, and my arm just kind of locks up, and I just am frozen on that bridge, and I can't let go. And I remember telling myself, you know, you can't even do that right. You know, I I knew right there I was worthless. You know, and I climbed back over that railing, and I had that long, aimless, wandering walk down that bridge and down a highway. You know, I felt soulless. You know, and a person pulled up on a car next to me on this highway as I walking, and it was a kid that let me stay at his house for a couple nights before I started robbing and stealing from him. And he saw me walking, and yeah, he's like, you know, I just wanted to see if you're okay and check on you if there's anything you need. And I didn't know what to tell him, but I asked him, can you give me a ride to the cemetery? And he gave me a ride to the cemetery, and I sat and I cried over my mother's grave, and for the first time in my life, I asked for help, but I didn't know who I was asking. I just asked for help. See, I was born and baptized Catholic. I was went to church every Sunday. I was force fed Catholicism. You know, God is Savior. All, you know, everything. You know, I learned. You know, about this God that I was supposed to follow. Yet, you know, to me, a God would never let something like what happened to me as a child ever happen. So I denounced God, and right, and I had the hugest resentment for against God for a very long time, right? So when I'm sitting there asking for help and not knowing who I'm asking, even though I wasn't a believer in something powerful than myself, there was something there listening to me. And eventually, when I finally left that cemetery and I walked back to the park I was sleeping in, and I got back to this town, and I got back on the main road, and a cop pulls up next to me, and this cop gets out of the car, and I knew who this cop was, and I knew the cop knew who I was, and he knew my family, and he said, "Get in the back of my car," and I had my spirit, my will was broke. I had You have that fight or flight. I had no fight, and I had no flight. I was so broken. He opened up that door, and I just got in. I didn't say a word. And he gets back in the car, and he says, "You have two options. You have your first option is you have 17 green sheets waiting for you at the police station, or I'm going to drive you to your aunt and uncle's house, and you're going to beg them to stay in that house tonight, and you're going to go get help in the morning." And he gave me a name of a place, and I didn't want to go to jail, so I took option two, which was probably harder than going to jail when you have to face your aunt and uncle and beg and plead for them to take you in for a night and take you to get help in the morning. But for somebody who thought no one loved him and had no one left in his corner, my uncle stood up and said, I will allow you to stay here tonight, and I will take you to get help in the morning." And he did not leave that house that night. He did not let me leave that house that night. He stayed up while I slept just so he knew I didn't leave the house. And that next morning, he took me to Bergen Regional Medical Center, and that was the start of my journey into Alcoholics Anonymous. They wouldn't let me into any inpatient program because I was not drunk or high at the time. And when he started to beg and plead to some of the counselors, and he started telling them what I've been through as a child, not knowing that in the next room was one of us, the director of the outpatient program, who was listening to my uncle the whole time and came out of her office and said, "Go down to the ER right now." And then we went down to the ER, and I sat in the ER for 6 hours before they told me that they couldn't get me into any bed and that you can start IOP that Monday. So I had to make it through the rest of Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And they gave me a meeting book, and I opened up that meeting book, and it was a meeting in my town, and my uncle took me to that meeting in that town. And I remember standing in front of that door. It was the scariest thing that I ever did in my entire life. That fear of unknown, not knowing what was behind that door waiting for me. And after I mustered up enough strength to open that door and go in, and I see all these people sitting in chairs, and I see a bunch of them stop and like stare at me, and I'm just kind of frozen again. And old timers said, "Are you gonna just sit there, or you stand there? Or are you gonna sit your ass in the seat?" And I sat down, and I sat through the whole meeting. And that same old timer came up to me, and we started chatting, and he walked with me to my uncle. And after a couple minutes, he relieved my uncle of his duties, and he said, "You're going to be with me the rest of this weekend. I'm going to pick you up. I'm going to take you to meetings. And I have a feeling I know a good meeting that you'd like." So that weekend, he took me to a bunch of meetings. That Friday, my first meeting was August 5th, 2005. And I'll never forget that day because it was my journey into recovery. And he took me through the meetings all weekend. And then that Tuesday comes, and he picks me up, and he brings me to this meeting, and he pulls in front of the door, and he's like, "All right, you're here." And I'm like, "You're not coming?" He's like, "This one isn't for me." And I went down, and I walked down those stairs, and I went in that basement. And I had never seen so many young people laughing and smiling and having a good time. in my entire life. I was kind of starstruck in a way, because I didn't know what to make of it. I didn't know, like, this is Alcoholics Anonymous. And I remember sitting down and I made it through that whole meeting. And the last 5 minutes were burning desires. I remember raised my hand and saying, and just breaking down and crying, and I need help. And in that night, I've never been shown more love than I have in my entire life. The amount of people that came up to me and shook my hand and hugged me and gave me their phone numbers and wouldn't leave me alone when I wanted to smoke a cigarette. And in peace outside, they would just like follow me like a herd of elephants. And that was the start. They taught me about sponsorship and getting a sponsor and going through the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and how that in that big book of Alcoholics Anonymous is a design for living. And if I go through those 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, that I can live a happy, joyous, and free life. And I don't ever have to think about drinking or drugs ever again. And I thought it was too good to be true, because I kept seeing the word God, and I hated God, and I resented God, and I was like, no freaking way. But I gave it a shot, and I white knuckled it for 6 months, yesing people about a higher power and lying to myself and being in denial. But I white knuckled it, and I stayed sober for 10 months, and I probation and got a job and started saving money, and my uncle was saving money for me and got me a car. And in the 10th month, it was a choice between an AA barbecue and a girl I haven't seen in a very long time, and I chose the girl I haven't seen in a very long time. And in that one night, I got extremely drunk, got behind the wheel of my car on the New Jersey Turnpike, passed out, and next thing I knew, when I woke up, my car was shaking uncontrollably, and I didn't know what I hit until the state troopers told me I slammed into a guardrail. Sitting in that holding cell that night, drunk as a skunk, my eyes opened wider than they had ever opened before. And I knew right then, if I ever put another drink or drug in my body, not only can I kill somebody, I can hurt myself, and I'm gonna hurt my family again. So I finally got honest, and I opened up that door, and I said, maybe a higher power of my understanding isn't far from reach if I just open and willing and honest. And I got a new sponsor, and I started going through the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous with an open mind. And I had an experience that I never had ever before in my life. All that burden and that trauma and that hatred started to melt away. I was able to make right the wrongs of my past. I was able to make amends to family. I was able to make amends to people that I've hurt, even if it was something small. I was able to let go of that anger and hatred. I was able to forgive my father, because as a sick alcoholic, I know what it's like to have an illness. And for him, he had to have had an illness to be able to do something that he did. So if I can forgive myself for having an illness, why can't I forgive another human being? And my perspective started to change, and I started to look at life differently, and I started to think differently, and I started to, walk differently. And all those promises Alcoholics Anonymous talked about started to come true. I started to see those gifts. And I don't know how much time I have left. So I'll try to be a little quicker here. But after about 2 years, I met the girl of my dreams, or quote unquote, thought the girl of my dreams. She was, an 8th grade crush from school that I haven't seen in a really long time, and we rekindled, and she was not one of us. And we ended up dating and we ended up having a child together, and we got married, and AA started to take a back seat. And I started to focus more on the marriage and being a father than I did focusing on me and my recovery. And eventually, Alcoholics Anonymous was no longer being able to be seen from the rearview mirror. And I became an extremely dry alcoholic. And for 6.5 years, I stopped going to meetings. I stopped doing service. I stopped talking to my network. And I focused only and only on the marriage and my child. And eventually, I stopped focusing on the marriage and I focused on just being a good parent. And slowly but surely, character defects and started to pile on and pile on and pile on, and everything started to crumble around me. My marriage crumbled. I ended up getting a divorce, and um, we tried to fix the marriage by having another child, which I do not recommend for anybody. But silver lining, I got 2 beautiful daughters out of it. And after almost 9 years of marriage and 6.5 years of not being in Alcoholics Anonymous, we decided to get a divorce and I moved back home. And I knew that night, the minute I got home, I knew exactly what I needed to do. Because the same way I felt walking off that bridge after trying to take my life, I felt that night. I felt lost and I didn't know what to do. So I picked up a meeting book and I found a meeting on Hope Street in Ridgewood, New Jersey. And I said, that's all I need, all the hope I can get. And I showed up to that meeting late, and there was it was a 3-speaker meeting, and 3 speakers were already in the process of speaking. And when the last speaker finished and the chair went up and said, I'd like to thank the Bergen County young people for coming and sharing their experience, strength, and hope. And after 6.5 years of not being in Alcoholics Anonymous, the first meeting I attend back, my home group was speaking. And I lost it. And if that's not God saying, welcome home, I don't know what is.
Chris, that's your time.
That's my time. So I came back and, I'm here and I live a wonderful life today. So thank you for letting me share.